Grace is going to make an announcement. Okay, Grace.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, may I please ask you to take your seats in order for us to begin with the high-level segment for heads of state and government. Thank you.
You're beautiful, darling. Not that short. You what?
Down.
No, that's not. No, they made another. No, no, no. They,
This is
no,
photo, sir.
look, Jim. Listen. They made another mark.
Ladies and gentlemen, could I please request you to take your seats? We're about to start. Distinguished heads of state and government, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, honoured guests, welcome to the opening of the first part of the high-level segment on the occasion of the 26th session of the Conference of the Parties, the 16th session of the Conference of the Parties serving as a meeting of the parties to the Kyoto Protocol, and the third session of the Conference of the Parties serving as a meeting of the parties to the Paris Agreement. Today, heads of state and governments will deliver national statements in parallel plenaries, Ken Grom and Penny Fan. Before we begin, I would like to remind distinguished heads of state and government of actions in place to ensure effective time management. There is a 3-minute time limit for statements during the high-level segment. Statements should be as concise as possible, noting that full text of the official statements will be made available on the UNFCCC website. And finally, please note that heads of state or government who are not in the plenary at the time for delivery of their statements will be rescheduled to speak at the end of all statements of the same category. As part of the hygiene measures to ensure a safe environment of all participants, statements will be delivered from alternate rostrums. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, honoured guests, I'm delighted that so many of you have joined us here in Glasgow to make your vital national statements. I invite you all to take this opportunity to demonstrate how your country has strengthened its commitments under the Paris Agreement. To tell us what steps you are taking to deliver these targets and plans, and crucially, how together we can do more. On this stage today, you have the chance to send a clear signal to your negotiators and the world about what must be achieved at COP26 and why we must work together to accelerate climate action in this decisive decade. As you all know, the science is clear that the window of time that we have to keep the Paris temperature goal in reach and to avoid the worst effects of climate change is closing, fast. But with political will and commitment, we can and must deliver an outcome in Glasgow the world can be proud of. I'm also pleased that after the national statements today and in breaks in the programme tomorrow, we will hear from a selection of leading voices across civil society, business and finance to celebrate and showcase action and ambition across all 3 pillars of the Paris Agreement. At this time, I will now close the video link connecting the plenaries, and we will proceed with the delivery of national statements in both plenaries. At the end of the delivery of national statements in each plenary, the meeting will be adjourned. The world will be listening intently to your statements. It is now my great pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Pedro Sánchez Pérez-Castillon, President of the Government of Spain. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Presidentes de Gobierno, primeros ministros, delegados y delegadas, desde que nos reunimos en Madrid hace ya 2 años, la certeza sobre los catastróficos riesgos de la emergencia climática es cada vez mayor. Como nos recordaba en su intervención el secretario general de Naciones Unidas, los científicos certifican el código rojo en el que nos encontramos. Es evidente que necesitamos un nuevo orden internacional que reconozca el papel de todos los actores, de los gobiernos, de las administraciones públicas, de la ciudadanía, de las empresas, del sector financiero, como agentes imprescindibles del cambio, que asuma que esta década es clave y que consiga alinear la ambición a corto plazo con una mirada de largo alcance. La buena noticia es que sabemos lo que hay que hacer, pero necesitamos determinación política y acción inmediata. El primer objetivo debe ser reducir emisiones y elevar nuestro nivel de ambición, de modo que el objetivo del 1,5 de grados centígrados sigue siendo un objetivo a nuestro alcance. Debemos apostar por las energías renovables, la eficiencia energética, la movilidad limpia, la conservación y la restauración de nuestros ecosistemas y la rehabilitación urbana. Debemos abandonar los combustibles fósiles y es fundamental proteger la biodiversidad y preservar nuestros océanos y la Antártica. Por eso, mi país, España, ha reducido la generación eléctrica de carbón en un 90% en estos últimos 4 años. Y además lo hemos hecho con diálogo y con paz social, porque la transición ecológica debe ser justa. Nuestras sociedades, y este es uno de los principales retos que tenemos por delante, deben percibir la transición ecológica no como una amenaza, sino como una inmensa oportunidad de crecimiento económico inclusivo. Estamos en este sentido también en nuestro país, en España, dando pasos decisivos para alinear nuestras inversiones, tanto públicas como privadas, con el objetivo de la neutralidad climática. Hemos dotado a nuestro país de la primera ley de cambio climático y transición energética que así lo establece, y la decisión de destinar casi 30.000 millones de euros en los próximos 3 años a la transición ecológica es la mejor expresión de nuestra voluntad política. En segundo lugar, debemos crear marcos adecuados para nuestras políticas de adaptación, algo cuya importancia España entiende bien, ya que nuestro país es especialmente vulnerable a fenómenos extremos. A nivel doméstico, contamos con un segundo Plan Nacional a 2030 y hemos enviado la comunicación de adaptación de España a Naciones Unidas. También vamos a reforzar nuestra acción exterior en este ámbito y por eso mi país, España, va a aportar 30 millones de euros al Fondo de Adaptación.
Herr Präsident, Exzellenzen, meine Damen und Herren, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen! Ich hatte die Ehre, im Jahre 1995 als Umweltministerin der Bundesrepublik Deutschland die erste Vertragsstaatenkonferenz zu leiten. Heute hier in Glasgow wird die COP26 die letzte Konferenz sein, bei der ich dabei bin. Und deshalb stellt sich natürlich die Frage, wo stehen wir heute? Wir haben eine Vielzahl von Beschlüssen gefasst, gerade gestern wieder bei den G20 in Rom. Und wir haben vor allen Dingen als unsere Leitmarkierung das Abkommen von Paris aus dem Jahr 2015. Aber, und das haben wir in der Eröffnungssitzung auch schon gehört, wir sind nicht da, wo wir hin müssen. Die von den Vertragsstaaten abgelieferten Reduktionsziele, die NDCs, ergeben zusammen nicht das, was wir in Paris vereinbart haben. Und die Welt hofft natürlich darauf, und ich unterstreiche das, dass wir am Ende dieser Glasgow-Konferenz besser dastehen. Da geht es einmal um die verbesserten Ziele, aber es geht vor allen Dingen in den nächsten Tagen auch um die technischen Fragen, wie können wir unsere Ziele verbindlicher messen und damit ein einheitliches Maß auch entwickeln. Dass die Auswirkungen des Klimawandels verheerend sind, wissen wir. Wir müssen, und ich sage auch, wir können, das Pariser Abkommen umsetzen und das nicht erst im Laufe dieses Jahrhunderts, sondern wie wir als G20 gesagt haben, in der Mitte dieses 21. Jahrhunderts. Wir wissen, dass insbesondere die Industrieländer Verantwortung tragen und das betrifft natürlich natürlich auch die Bundesrepublik Deutschland. Deshalb haben wir unsere Klimaziele noch einmal verschärft. Wir wollen bis 2030 65% unserer Emissionen einsparen gegenüber 1990 und bis 2045 klimaneutral sein. Essentiell für die Glaubwürdigkeit der Industrieländer ist aber auch die Finanzierung. Deutschland und Kanada haben sich unseren Delivery-Plan noch einmal angeschaut. Wir müssen zugeben, dass wir die 100 Milliarden US-Dollar-Finanzierung erst 2023 erreichen, aber immerhin verspätet, aber wir können sie erreichen. Das ist ein wichtiges Signal. Wir leisten von deutscher Seite hier einen beträchtlichen Beitrag und werden den bis 2025 auf 6 Milliarden erhöhen. Klimaneutralität zu erreichen, das ist auf der einen Seite die Zielsetzung, aber auf der anderen Seite sind es die konkreten Maßnahmen. Und neben unseren nationalen Anstrengungen versuchen wir natürlich, an verschiedenen Stellen Beiträge zu sein. Mit der Glasgow Leaders Declaration of Forests and Land Use stärken wir den Schutz von Wäldern. Und für mich ist wichtig, dass wir bis 2030 den Waldverlust global stoppen. Wir haben eine erfolgreiche Partnerschaft mit Kolumbien, in der wir gemeinsam mit Norwegen und dem Vereinigten Königreich den Schutz der Wälder voranbringen. Deutschland wird Teil einer Initiative sein, von der ich glaube, dass sie besonders interessant ist, nämlich einer Just Energy Transition Partnership mit Südafrika, wo wir zeigen, wie wir aus der Nutzung von Kohle aussteigen können. Und ich glaube, das wird ein Pilotprojekt für viele afrikanische Länder sein, denn die Wahrheit ist natürlich sehr konkret. Und dass wir gestern bei G20 verabredet haben, die internationale Finanzierung von Kohlekraftwerken zu stoppen, und zwar jetzt, ist gefährlich. Meine Damen und Herren, wir werden mit staatlichen Aktivitäten alleine nicht vorankommen, sondern es geht um eine umfassende Transformation unseres Lebens, Arbeitens und Wirtschaftens. Und deshalb will ich hier ein klares Plädoyer einlegen für die Bepreisung von Kohlenstoffemissionen, von CO2-Emissionen. Mit einer solchen Bepreisung, die wir in der Europäischen Union schon haben, die in China eingeführt wird und die mit vielen anderen zusammen weltweit entwickelt werden muss, können wir unsere Industrie, unsere Wirtschaft dazu bringen, die technologisch besten und effizientesten Wege finden, um zur Klimaneutralität zu kommen. Und es geht um die Veränderung unseres Wirtschaftens, Arbeitens, und das ist eine umfassende Transformation. Dann werden wir wissen, wie wir am besten CO2-freie Mobilität, CO2-freie Industrie und CO2-freie Prozesse unseres Lebens arrangieren können. Deshalb ein klares Plädoyer in der Dekade des Handelns, in der Dekade, in der wir jetzt leben, national ambitionierter zu sein, aber global Instrumente zu finden, die nicht nur Steuergelder einsetzen, sondern auch wirtschaftlich vernünftig sind. Und das ist für mich die CO2-Bepreisung. Herzlichen Dank.
And that is, as I see it, putting a price on CO2 emissions. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Abdul Hamid Mohammed Al-Dabaiba, Prime Minister of Libya. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سيد الرئيس، السيدات والسادة الحضور الكريم، تحية مسائية طيبة. أود أن أشكر المملكة المتحدة وإيطاليا على جهودهم المبذولة من أجل تنظيم هذه القمة، والتي تظهر قوة التعاون الدولي في التصدي لأحد التحديات المعاصرة التي تواجه العالم. كما أتقدم بشكر خاص لسلطات مدينة غلاسكو على تنظيم هذا الحدث العظيم العالمي. ولا يفوتني أن أشيد بحركة وبحرص المملكة المتحدة على اتخاذ الإجراءات الوقائية اللازمة لضمان سلامة الوفود المشتركة في هذه القمة. قادة العالم المشاركين في هذه القمة، أشكركم وأحييكم على دوركم تجاه قضية تغيير المناخ التي أثبتت المؤشرات والإحصائيات بأنها تشكل تهديدا كبيرا على كوكبنا. سيد الرئيس، الأخوة الحاضرين، بعد تولي حكومة الوحدة الوطنية لمهامها قامت باستحداث وزارة تعني بقضايا البيئة وشكلت لجنة وطنية للتغيير المناخي، وتمت المصادقة مؤخرا على اتفاقية باريس لتغيير المناخ إيمانا منا بأهمية هذا الملف، وإن مساهمة الدول المتضررة ومنها بلادي في المحصلة العالمية لتراكم غازات الاحتباس الحراري يعد ضئيلا جدا مقارنة بمستوى الانبعاثات الناجمة عن الحركة الصناعية في الدول المتقدمة، مما يدفع بعض الدول للعمل خارج المنظومة الدولية ورفض إجراءات التكييف مع التغييرات المناخية. وإننا من هذا المنبر ندعو الدول الكبرى المشاركة في هذه القمة إلى الوفاء وعودها التي اتخذتها في مؤتمرات.
To state the obvious, we meet with the eyes of history upon us and the profound questions before us. It's simple. Will we act? Will we do what is necessary? Will we seize the enormous opportunity before us? Or will we condemn future generations to suffer? This is the decade that will determine the answer, this decade. The science is clear. We only have a brief window left before us to raise our ambitions and to meet the task that's rapidly narrowing. This is a decisive decade in which we have an opportunity to prove ourselves. We can keep the goal of limiting global warming to just 1.5 degrees Celsius within our reach if we come together. If we commit to doing our part of each of our nations with determination and with ambition. That's what COP26 is all about. Glasgow must be the kickoff of a decade of ambition and innovation to preserve our shared future. Climate change is already ravaging the world. We've heard from many speakers. It's not hypothetical. It's not a hypothetical threat. It's destroying people's lives and livelihoods, and doing it every single day. It's costing our nations trillions of dollars. Record heat and drought, fueling more widespread and more intense wildfires in some places and crop failures in others. Record flooding and what used to be a once-in-a-century storms are now happening every few years. In the past few months, the United States has experienced all of this, and every region of the world can tell similar stories. And in an age where this pandemic is made so painfully clear that no nation can wall itself off from borderless threats, we know that none of us can escape the worst that's yet to come if we fail to seize this moment. But ladies and gentlemen, within the growing catastrophe, I believe there's an incredible opportunity, not just for the United States, but for all of us. We're standing at an inflection point in world history. We have the ability to invest in ourselves and build an equitable, clean energy future, and in the process, create millions of good-paying jobs and opportunities around the world. Cleaner air for our children, more bountiful oceans, healthier forests and ecosystems for our planet. We can create an environment that raises the standard of living around the world. And this is a moral imperative, but it's also an economic imperative. If we fuel greater growth, new jobs, better opportunities for all our people, and as we see current volatility in energy prices rather than cast it as a reason to back off our clean energy goals, we must view it as a call to action. High energy prices only reinforce the urgent need to diversify sources, double down on clean energy development, and adapt promising new clean energy technologies so we can not only we don't remain overly reliant on one source of power to power our economies and our communities. It's in the self-interest of every single nation. And this is a chance, in my view, to make a generational investment in our economic resilience and in our workers and our communities throughout the world. That's what we're going to do in the United States. My Build Back Better framework will make historic investments in clean energy, the most significant investment to deal with the climate crisis that any advanced nation has made ever. We're going to cut U.S. greenhouse gas emissions by well over a gigaton by 2030, while making it more affordable for consumers to save on their own energy bills, with tax credits for things like installing solar panels, weatherizing their homes. Lowering energy prices will also deliver cleaner air and water for our children, electrifying fleets of school buses, increasing credits for electric vehicles, and addressing legacy pollution. It will incentivize clean energy manufacturing, building the solar panels and the wind turbines that are growing energy markets of the future, which will create good-paying union jobs for American workers, and something that none of us should lose sight of. When I talk to the American people about climate change, I tell them it's about jobs. It's about workers who will lay thousands of miles of transmission lines of clean, modern, resilient power grid. The auto workers who build the next generation of electric vehicles and electricians who will install a nationwide network of 500,000 vehicle stations to power them throughout my country. The engineers who will design new carbon capture systems, and the construction workers who will make them a reality. The farmers who will not only help fight global hunger, but also use the soil to fight climate change. The communities that revitalize themselves around new industries and opportunities. And because we are taking all these actions, the United States will be able to meet the ambitious target I set in the Leaders Summit in Climate back in April, reducing U.S. emissions by 50 to 52% below 2005 levels by 2030. We'll demonstrate to the world the United States is not only back at the table, but hopefully leading by the power of our example. I know it hasn't been the case, and that's why my administration is working overtime to show that our climate commitment is action, not words. On my very first day in office, I took action to return the United States to the Paris Agreement. Since then, our administration has been hard at work unlocking clean energy breakthroughs to drive down the cost of technologies that will require us to achieve net zero emissions, and working with the private sector on the next generation of technologies that will power a clean economy of the future. Over the next several days, the United States will be announcing new initiatives to demonstrate our commitment to providing innovative solutions across multiple sectors, from agriculture to oil and gas, to combating deforestation, to tackling hard and to abate industries. We're planning for both short-term sprint to 2030 that will keep 1.5 degrees Celsius in reach, and for a marathon that will take us to the finish line and transform the largest economy in the world into a thriving, innovative, equitable, and just clean energy engine of net zero for a net zero world. That's why today I'm releasing the U.S. long-term strategy, which presents a vision of achieving the United States goal of net zero emissions economy-wide by no later than 2050, and reinforces an absolutely critical nature of taking bold action in the decisive decade. We're also going to try to do our part when it comes to helping the rest of the world take action as well. We want to do more to help countries around the world, especially developing countries, accelerate their clean energy transition, address pollution, and ensure the world we all must share a cleaner, safer, healthiest planet. We have an obligation to help. In the United Nations, at the United Nations in September, I announced that my administration is working with the Congress to quadruple our climate finance support for developing countries by 2024, including significant increase in support for adaptation efforts. This commitment is made possible to each of our collective goals of mobilizing $100 billion annually for climate finance, but mobilizing finance at the scale necessary to meet the incredible need is an all-hands-on-deck effort. As other speakers today have mentioned, governments in the private sector and multilateral development banks must also do their work to go from millions to billions to trillions, the necessary effect of this transition. Today, I'm also submitting a new adaptation communication laying out how we'll implement the global goal of adaptation, as well as announcing our first ever contribution to the Adaptation Fund. But our commitment is about more than just financing. That's a critical piece of it. But we're also going to support solutions across the board. In the lead up to this gathering, the United States joined our G7 partners to launch a Build Back Better World initiative. We also reconvened the Major Economies Forum on Energy and Climate to launch transformative actions and to raise ambition. And together with the European Union, we're launching a global methane pledge to collectively reduce methane emissions, one of the most potent greenhouse gases, by at least 30% by the end of the decade. More than 70 countries have already signed up to support rapid reduction of methane pollution, and I encourage every nation to sign on. It's the simple, most effective strategy we have to slow global warming in the near term. My friends, if we're to recognize that a better, more hopeful future of every nation has to do its part, with ambitious targets to keep 1.5 degrees in reach, and specific plans on how to get there, especially the major economies. It's imperative that we support developing nations so they can be our partners in this effort. Right now, we're still falling short. There's no more time to hang back or sit on the fence or argue amongst ourselves. This is a challenge of our collective lifetimes, the existential threat to human existence as we know it. And every day we delay, the cost of inaction increases. So let this be the moment that we answer history's call here in Glasgow. Let this be the start of a decade of transformative action that preserves our planet and raises the quality of life for people everywhere. We can do this. We just have to make a choice to do it. So let's get to work, and thank you. Those of us who are responsible for much of the deforestation and all the problems we have so far have an overwhelming obligation to the nations who, in fact, were not there, have not done it. And we have to help much more than we have thus far. God bless you all, and may God save the planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I'll now request COP Rapporteur Ahmed Rajabi to continue chairing this session.
It is now my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Joko Widodo, President of Indonesia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Yang Mulia,
Your Excellency, climate change is a major threat to global prosperity and development. Solidarity, partnership, cooperation, global collaboration are key. With its abundant natural resources, Indonesia continues to contribute in tackling climate change. Deforestation rates have fallen significantly, the lowest in 20 years. Rates of forest fires were down by 82% in 2020. Indonesia has begun the rehabilitation of mangrove forests covering an area of 600,000 hectares by 2024, the largest in the world. Indonesia has also rehabilitated 3 million critical lands between 2010 to 2019. The sector, which contributed 60% of Indonesia's emissions, will reach carbon net sink by 2030. In the energy sector, we continue to move forward with the development of electric vehicle ecosystem, development of Southeast Asia's largest solar power plant, utilization of new and renewable energy, including biofuels, as well as development of clean energy industries, including the world's largest green industrial park in North Kalimantan. However, this is not sufficient. We, particularly countries with large green areas and regreening potentials, as well as countries with vast seas that have the potential to contribute to carbon sequestration, we need support and contribution from developed countries. Indonesia will continue to mobilize climate finance and innovative financing, such as blended finance, green bonds, and green sukuk or Sharia bonds. Fulfillment of climate finance by developed country partners is a game changer in climate change mitigation and adaptation for developing countries. Indonesia will be able to contribute faster to the world's net zero emissions goal. The question is, how big are developed countries' contributions for us? What kind of transfers of technology can be provided? This creates action and implementation as quickly as possible. In addition, carbon market and carbon pricing must be part of our efforts to address climate change issues. A carbon economy ecosystem that is transparent and has integrity, inclusive and fair must be created. Excellencies, in closing, at this summit, on behalf of the Archipelagic and Small Island States Forum, or the AIS, Indonesia is honored to circulate a joint statement of the leaders of the Archipelagic and Island States Forum, and the AIS Forum will continue its commitment to promote maritime cooperation and climate action in the UNFCCC. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is now my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Wawel John Charles Ramkalawan, President of Seychelles. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you, fellow leaders of our nations, thus of our planet, neither as a scientist nor as an environmental expert, but as a citizen of our beautiful planet, and more specifically as an island boy facing reality. What I experience in my beautiful islands that most visitors describe as paradise is the destruction of our environment and livelihood. This, I am sure, is what we all see in the various parts of the world we come from, be it flooding, forest fires, extreme temperatures, delayed rainy seasons, coastal erosion, destruction of wildlife, fewer and smaller fish, and many more. These, unfortunately, are all part of the destruction process of planet Earth and the self-imposed eventual extinction of the planet's most intelligent species, the human being. Some of the questions that our young people are asking us, and which should touch our conscience as guardians of this oxygen-blessed planet are. Leaders, when are you going to shift from words to action? When are you going to stop making empty promises? When are you going to start taking us and our future seriously? When are you going to show that you actually care? These are damning questions that will confirm our legacy. Forget about mammoth achievements. For 1 second, we must all look at the mandate bestowed on us and allow our decisions to surpass political considerations and repose on only one agenda: the survival of our planet. Our people want a better life, and this starts by being alive. Seychelles is a victim. So are other small island developing states. We suffer the effects and consequences of industrialization and climate change. We are already gasping for survival. When I hear the expression rise in sea level, I am scared because it brings home the awareness that my country's granitic islands will lose all the economic activities happening around the coast. And I also realize that the beautiful archipelago of 115 islands that we are today may be reduced to less than 50 as our coral islands disappear, including the Aldabra Atoll, our gift to humanity. Fellow leaders, from the Seychelles, our message is simple. We have to act immediately. The environment partnership to save our planet must happen here in Glasgow 2021. Let COP26 be the determining point. Let the change be a real one. Let the paradigm shift happen. May the industrialized nations understand that they cannot continue polluting without reserve. May those who exploit without thinking of tomorrow stop. May the corrupt poachers of our planet change their ways. And may we realize that in this battle to save our planet, we are not in the proverbial same boat, but that we are indeed in the same boat, big, small, rich or poor. The disaster experienced by COVID-19 will be seen as but a breeze. For COVID, the world came together and developed the vaccine. For the protection of our planet, the only vaccine is our sincere commitment and concrete actions. In other words, we have to be honest and action-oriented. I plead with the rich nations to look at the less fortunate ones as equal partners. Can we agree, for example, to put an end to the expression high income earning in order to accept a vulnerability index whereby we will not be measured according to the sacrifice, the hard work, planning, and devotion to serve our people, but rather on how vulnerable we actually are. Seychelles is considered high income, but overnight it lost 75% of its tourism industry due to COVID-19, and the world stopped for my people. This is vulnerability. Can we, the ones who are less responsible for the planet's destruction, but who on the contrary are doing our utmost, like preserving our limited landmass or EEZ, be helped generously when we are protecting our coastlines, preserving our disappearing islands, managing seagrass meadows larger than Switzerland, or fighting IUU fishing activities? Our message is, we cannot do it with our limited resources. We need your contribution. We have one mission today, Mr. President, and that is to save our planet. In order to accomplish the task, we have to come together and act immediately. The partnership is for yesterday. Tomorrow is not an option, for it will be too late. The African proverb resonates loudly in my head. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. But today, at COP26, my ancestors from Africa are asking me to tweak this proverb. If you want to destroy the planet quickly, go alone. If you want to save the planet, let us do it together. Our youth and future generations are pleading and counting on us. Our children, babies, and Mother Nature herself are telling us loudly and clearly, no hypocrisy, no make-believe, no empty promises, no hot air. Rather, they want our commitment, steadfastness, and resolve. So from Seychelles, we are doing our best. We are committed, however small we are. Let us not disappoint our youth and the world, but rather, as one human race, let us save our habitat, and by doing so, let us save our planet and ensure the survival of our beautiful Mother Earth. The time to act is yesterday. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is now my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Emmanuel Macron, President of France. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, heads of government, heads of state, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, many things have been said, and we have, at the opening, have said extremely strong things, and there was a lot of emotion, I believe, because we want to say how urgent things are, and we are aware of what we're experiencing. And if we're expected to act collectively today, well, if we met today collectively, is to say what we said 6 years ago. We need to, at the beginning, there was not agreement. There are three values: ambition, solidarity, and trust. That is pursuant to the Paris Agreement. During the last 6 years, since Paris, some have forgotten these values. Some have wanted to drop out or doubt, but we've held fast. When we look at the last few years that have just gone by, we have been able to keep all of the international community united so that we can continue to fight and face the problem. Now, our challenge as to whether to see if this COP is successful or not is mid-term results. Our aim is 1.5 degrees by the end of this century. It was reaffirmed yesterday in the G20 in Rome. We know that today we're not there yet because the September report, UN report, says that the current trend would leave us to 2.7 degrees. The efforts made in the run-up to COP over the last few weeks are starting to reduce that gap between those two figures. The key of our collective action is that in the next few days before the closure of this COP, we need to have enough commitment to be able to go back to this 1.5 temperature rise rather than us going back to national strategies which decredibilize these objectives. We need to speed up our strategies between now and 2030. That first ambition we need to strategy we need to recover is ambition. This is what carries our national strategies, and the figures speak volumes about this. We all need to have strategies that match the 1.5 increase maximum. That needs to be embodied in our national strategies. In this respect, France, but more broadly the European Union, as well as the United Kingdom, are today ready to meet their commitments. Our challenge is now to implement our commitments, and I do not underestimate the importance or the difficulty thereof. We today have a challenge before us, namely the implementation of the Green Deal at European level of our national strategies. But the figures we have committed ourselves to are those which will enable us to give credibility to this a target of 1.5. So energy transition, economic model transition. This transition must be fair, just, and supported by social decisions. This transition will make it possible also for us to be able to create new opportunities, new jobs through, in particular, deep innovations, the building of new sectors, of new industries and new opportunities. That is what we are doing. That is what we are focusing our efforts on. We're implementing all of this nationally and at European level. But in addition to that, the key of the next 2 weeks at COP is this: the largest emitters whose national strategies do not match our strategy of 1.5 increase. Those countries responsible for most emissions must scale up in the next 2 weeks their ambitions. That would be the only way for us to give credibility back to our strategy and for us to have strategies between now and 2030 which will make it possible for this 1.5 target to be credible. Number two, solidarity. During the pandemic, we've all experienced this solidarity. People have just referred to it. Now, we cannot meet these international challenges unless we are coordinated, unless we act together. The context we're in is a context in which climate change, to a certain extent, is injustice squared. It's the most poor countries in Africa, in the Caribbean, in the Pacific, who are the first victims of climate change. They are those who are very often the ones who do not implement the development model are the subject of climate change. SIDS, indigenous peoples, suffer the effects of climate change. And the second key target of this COP is 100 billion per year dedicated to combat climate change. France and the European Union are now have met their commitment and even exceeded them. Europe is going to spend 25 billion per year. We've raised our France spends over 7 billion per year, over a third of what a third dedicated to adaptation. But all developed economies must now contribute their fair share because the leadership demands us to give an example. If we want to be leaders, we need to give the example. We need to find all means to ensure that the richest countries speed up this financing because we've committed ourselves to put on the table this $100 billion per year between 2020 and 2025 before we put even more on the table subsequently. I would like to appeal to those countries who are not contributing what they should today to meet their responsibilities between now and the end of COP so that we can fulfill this obligation that we undertook in Paris. And if we have to find measures that will correct our course with the IMF, we can mobilize in addition to the G20 agreement, in addition to the special drawing rights, which will thus be used by the poorest countries or the countries of middle income. This is a crucial matter. This solidarity must happen because it makes action possible wherever solutions to reduce emissions exist. A wonderful example was given over the last few weeks with the support we collectively found to help South Africa to reduce its carbon dependence, or coal dependence. It's this model of cooperation we need to build our strategy on. This agreement shows us that we can meet the challenges of fair, equitable and ambitious transition. The third value I was referring to earlier on, ladies and gentlemen, is trust and transparency. Our youth were invited to join our debates. They want to see us commit ourselves. They want us to follow up. They want things to be measurable. So beyond these commitments, we must follow with rigor and transparency in a common framework what we do. We need to monitor what we do. I'm delighted in that respect that the OECD is launching at COP26 the International Programme for Climate Action, IPAC, we began that in last December. Thanks to this, we'll be able to follow country by country what everyone is doing and what remains to be done. I very much hope that we'll be able to go further altogether. OECD must follow up and every year draft a report on full transparency of the use of the $100 billion and how they have been appropriated. Today, we're almost certain that the countries of Africa, of the Pacific, Latin America and the Caribbean who need them the most are not those countries that are receiving the most. We know that is the case. So beyond our announcements, we need to be transparent as to the follow-up, the monitoring of how these $100 billion will be spent. Ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to speak to you about these three values so that this COP can be a success. If we mobilize and decide and act, it will be a success. Just one thing to conclude. Beyond all of these announcements, all of this will only make progress if we are consistent, if we manage to link this agenda against climate change and to other agendas, namely biodiversity and trade. Biodiversity, first of all, because we know today that these agendas are linked. Biodiversity is our best ally to combat climate change, global warming, and will help us to find natural carbon sinks and solutions. Thanks to it, we'll be able to give, especially to Africa, its full role in this battle. The tropical forests must be protected. That is consistent. That is a crucial element. And several of my colleagues from Africa who will speak after me are promoters, eminent promoters thereof. The Great Wall, Green Wall, defended by the Mauritanian president, is a key element thanks to which we'll be able to combat not only desertification, but also propose solutions that are economic, trade solutions, and our mobilizations for the oceans. It must happen also. This agenda goes hand in hand, is intricately linked with the agenda to combat climate change. Finally, we must be consistent with our trade frameworks, our trade environment, and our environment and climate frameworks. Too many of us here commit ourselves and then sign contradictory trade agreements. We cannot continue to have a planet that we are causing to function according to rules that do not embody at their heart these constraints. Our trade agreements must reflect our climate commitments. The organization of our value chains must reflect our climate requirements, demands. And that is why I appeal to people today for us to develop in Africa and in the Caribbean and in South America and in all of these vulnerable regions, in all these regions, solutions and industrial pathways, industrial industries to meet challenges rather than continue to provide solutions that come from the end of the other end of the world and which are built upon our current financial models. Our solidarity through these $100 billion must make it possible for people to develop these industries which are regional economic opportunities. These are the few words I wanted to share with you. It is what we do, it is what we produce, is what we monitor transparently that will give full confidence, trust back to our youth, but which will also allow us to act properly and achieve the results we need for ourselves and for future generations. These are the few elements of my own convictions I wanted to share with you this afternoon. Thank you.
To $170 a ton in 2030. This is a meaningful price on pollution designed not just to make life cleaner, but also make life more affordable and less expensive for Canadians. I call on other countries to do the same. Just as globally we've agreed to a minimum corporate tax, we must work together to ensure it is no longer free to pollute anywhere in the world. That means establishing a shared minimum standard for pricing pollution. Of course, what's even better than pricing emissions is ensuring that they don't happen in the first place. Which brings me to my next major commitment. We'll cap oil and gas sector emissions today and ensure they decrease tomorrow at a pace and scale needed to reach net zero by 2050. That's no small task for a major oil and gas producing country. It's a big step that's absolutely necessary. To do our part globally, we've doubled our climate financing, including up to $1 billion for the transition away from coal. And to help deal with the consequences of climate change, Canada's making our first contribution to the Adaptation Fund. On doit trouver les solutions qui conviennent.
We must find the right solutions for our citizens in their everyday lives. And that is why Canada has set the goal of selling only zero-emissions vehicles and establishing an electricity distribution network with zero net emissions by 2035. As Minister Sharma recently said, Paris made promises. Glasgow must deliver on them. The threat of climate change knows no borders, and that is why we must work together to achieve tangible results. We must all cooperate as we did to combat the COVID-19 pandemic. We must act with the same urgency against the climate crisis and biodiversity loss.
Next 2 weeks, we must demonstrate how we'll deliver on the promise of Paris with transparency and accountability. To the world's most vulnerable who need us to act, to indigenous people who can show us the way, to young people marching in our streets in cities around the world, we hear you. It's true. Your leaders need to do better. That's why we're here today. What happened in Lytton can and has and will happen anywhere. How many more signs do we need? This is our time to step up and step up together. Merci.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Josiah Voreke Bainimarama, Prime Minister of Fiji. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you. Your Excellencies, Mbula Vinaka, and a very good afternoon. Your Excellencies, at COP21 in Paris, 1.5 was a compromise that Fiji struck alongside all of the world's most climate vulnerable nations. We knew then all the human tragedy that level of warming would mean. But it ensured, at the very least, that low-lying island nations and communities would survive. 6 years on, where has that goodwill gotten us? The world's collective climate commitments will see us fly past 1.5 by the end of the decade. We are losing the race to net zero to a coalition of carbon addicts who would rather fight for coal than for a future of good jobs and innovative industries created by climate ambition. These leaders make pledges, but won't show us plans. They even seek to spin the science, but we cannot let them ride out the urgency of accelerating action. Clean coal, responsible natural gas, and ethical oil are all figments of the shellfish mind. No matter what they call them, carbon emissions are wrecking the climate. There's nothing clean, natural, or ethical about it. Other leaders pursue a policy of appeasement. They sit idly by as their high-emitting counterparts destroy our children's futures. The science is clear, ladies and gentlemen. No city, no community, and no ecosystem will be spared from the reckoning that lies beyond 1.5 degrees of warming, including our oceans, the lungs of the planet. We have fallen so far off course that only bold and courageous action will suffice. 2060 is too late. Empty promises of mid-century ambition are not enough. All high-emitting countries must halve global emissions by 2030. The G20 nations who are prepared to make those commitments must demand the same from others. We have moral authority. you have a moral obligation. Together, our coalition of the willing can keep 1.5 alive, keep low-lying island nations above water, keep erratic and severe weather from devastating us all, and keep the trust between nations so that we can keep faith that our children and grandchildren will have a future. That includes making good on the promise of $100 billion in climate finance. We Pacific nations have not traveled to the other end of the world to watch our future sacrificed at the altar of appeasement of the world's worst emitters. The existence of our low-lying neighbors is not on the negotiating table. 1.5 is alive. It is possible.
Oh, yes, we wait for the green wall, but I get it tell us. No, thank you very much. I think we'll have two parts. One is the first one on restoration, and the second one on yeah. So we discussed that this morning.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you. And I think because
states and governments, President of the COP26, Mr. Alok Sharma, Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. First, I would like to express my appreciation to the government of the United Kingdom for organizing this very important event. During the next 2 weeks, our relationship with nature and each other will be tested. Now, I think it is high time to deliver a realistic pathway towards the goal of 1.5% decrease. Slovenia, in the role of the EU presidency, is working with our European partners in such direction. However, with only 8% of global CO2 emissions, the EU cannot solve the problem alone. We are committed to do our bidding, and we call on everyone else to do the same. Everyone needs to assume their share of responsibility and thus ensure that our joint efforts will be effective. Our goal is to reduce emissions by 55% by 2030, and we are working on updating our climate and energy legislation. Currently, our joint actions as a world are not close to achieving the goals set in Paris. The United Nations estimates that by 2030, greenhouse gases will be 16% higher than they were in 2010. I understand the hesitation. The green transition has to pay attention to its externalities. Our efforts should not endanger social cohesion and also not economic development. In fact, they are a necessary condition for successful reduction of emissions. I believe that technological and also political innovations will enable us to find new ways of ensuring all three objectives. Moving away from coal and oil as a source of our energy is a crucial element in reaching the goals we have set. A nuclear energy as a transitional source could substitute coal and oil. More investment has to be directed into new technologies and to support innovation that would lead to a cleaner, safer, and more efficient production of energy, such as hydrogen or fusion. In any case, we need to present realistic action plans on the matter as soon as possible. I would like to stress that Slovenia remains firmly committed towards achieving our joint target through a realistic approach. We have adopted the long-term strategy which sets the goal and the path towards climate neutrality by 2050. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, answering the challenges and adaptation to climate change is an imperative. We have to make our economies and societies more green and more resilient. Let us contribute our best and make this summit a success. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Naftali Bennett, Prime Minister of Israel. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, fellow leaders. As we gather here today in Glasgow, we know that history will judge our generation's response to this threat not by how ambitious we are, but by the actions we take. Israel is at the beginning of a revolution on climate change. We recently started implementing our 100-step plan, which means that we're currently doing more to promote clean energy and reduce greenhouse gases than at any other time in our country's history. For the first time, Israel is committing to cutting greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050 and will phase out of the use of coal by 2025. Yes, we're making progress, but let's be real. Israel's a small country. We're less than a third of the size of Scotland. So our carbon footprint may be small, but our impact on climate change can be mighty. If we're going to move the needle, we need to contribute Israel's most valuable source of energy, the energy and brain power of our people. You see, this is what fuels our innovation and ingenuity. This is where Israel can make a real difference. Israel may be 60% desert, but we've managed to make it bloom. We may be in one of the driest places on earth, but we've managed to become the world's #1 country in water innovation. As the country with the most startups per capita in the world, we must channel our efforts to saving the world. Behavioral change alone will only take us so far. We're going to need new inventions and new technologies that have not yet been even imagined. And this is why I call upon our entrepreneurs, our innovators in Israel and across the world. You can be the game changers. You can help save the planet. You see, instead of building yet another hyped-up internet app, why don't you launch startups that'll help solve this global threat? Israel's national pivot to climate solutions can be only achieved with the right ecosystem. We've done it before. This is why I set up a task force called the Green Sandbox to provide funds to help the entrepreneurs out and ensure that their path is free of bureaucratic bumps. My friends, as we work to keep people safe today, we will also be working for the resilience of tomorrow, where our children will breathe cleaner air, drink cleaner water, and live in a world that treats the planet better than we did. Israel can become the climate innovation nation, and we're ready to pave the way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Andrzej Babis.
Circumstances of Africa, which has been very ably put forward earlier and very well articulated by Elizabeth Wahote, the young girl who spoke to us earlier. Indeed, the findings of the international scientific community, including the recent report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, on the physical science and basis of climate change, underscore the special needs and circumstances of Africa, contribute to the vulnerability and the low adaptive capacity of African countries to climate change. The IPCC further notes that even with scaled-up global climate action, it will not be possible to avoid and to reduce all loss and damage from the impacts of climate change, and that by 2030, the economic costs of loss and damage in developing countries is expected to be between US dollars 290 billion and US dollars 580 billion. Throughout Africa, as the most vulnerable continent to the impacts of climate change, countries are already experiencing loss and damage of an increasing magnitude and frequency. We are therefore deeply concerned to hear that yesterday, during the adoption of the agenda for this conference, the item on the special needs and circumstances of Africa was yet again not adopted. And we expect the COP President to undertake extensive and comprehensive consultations and address the special needs and circumstances of African states, and indeed report back to us before the close of the session of the conference. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, our own Kenyan Eliud Kipchoge, the greatest marathoner of all time and our climate champion, and who will be attending this conference, has demonstrated to us that in a race against time, no human is limited. We have the means and the ability to protect our planet from climate change-related destruction and to secure peace and stability for all. What we need now is to recognize that we are in a race against time, and we need unanimity of purpose, we need boldness and unwavering political commitment to achieve the 1.5-degree pathway. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much.
Dear Mr. Chairman, dear heads of state and government, this summer, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change published its 6th report. It features research and projections by leading climate scientists on 4,000 pages. The book by William Jevons, The Coal Question, is much slimmer, and it is 150 years older. But what's in common between the two is a similar paradox. Increasing the efficiency of using a resource increases rather than reduces its consumption. Paradoxically, the implementation of the Paris Agreement is under threat from the implementation of the Paris Agreement itself. It is because of this goal to contain global warming within 2 or preferably 1.5 degrees and cut greenhouse gas emissions while reducing oil and gas consumption. This has caused a surge in demand for natural gas. As a result, prices have hit record highs. In its turn, coal consumption has grown 5% among the G20 nations, while rising by 1/3 across the coal-fired power plants of Europe as of September. As a result, there is a shortage of coal now. The same is true of oil. The sector is expected to continue switching from natural gas to those two, which is bound to result in increased emissions. According to the UN, the atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide, methane and nitrous oxide have reached their 10-year maximums. The Earth's temperatures, however, may rise way beyond 2 degrees. New calculations prove we'll have to make considerably greater efforts to achieve carbon neutrality than we anticipated in Paris back in 2015. Congratulations, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, Ukraine became one of the first European nations to ratify the Paris Agreement. By the scale of emissions reduction achieved, Ukraine ranks 4th among the 45 parties to the UN Framework Convention. Our goal is to reduce emissions by 65% by 2030 and achieve, not later than 2060, carbon neutrality. Ukraine has supported a number of initiatives of this conference, namely the Forests and Land Use Declaration. It is critical for us to secure access to reliable long-term financing, in particular as part of the Green Climate Fund. Dear friends, the Nobel laureate, Professor Boris, has neatly encapsulated the goal of the Glasgow conference. What we need is powerful solutions and urgent action. The latter deserves special attention. Back in 1992, we signed the UN Convention to stabilize greenhouse gas emissions. 3 years later, we agreed that just wasn't enough. We needed firm commitments. Those were established by the 1997 Kyoto Protocol, capping emissions into the atmosphere. The protocol entered into force 8 years after it was adopted in 2005. 6 years later, we decided to replace it with a new agreement. In 2015, we signed the Paris Agreement, and we agreed that we would begin implementing it in 5 years' time, that is in 2020. That is the pace at which we've been responding to environmental threats. The hurricanes Katrina and Sandy, the bleaching of the Great Barrier Reef, the earthquakes in Haiti and the Indian Ocean, the tsunamis, the floods, the wildfires, the droughts, all over the globe. Even the anomalous rainfall that flooded Glasgow 2 days before the climate summit are not acting as wake-up calls urging us to act. In my opinion, to overcome global warming, what we need is global warming. In relations between nations where trust is melting away with every passing year, agreements are worth nothing if for some people they're just empty words. This applies to both environmental treaties and other agreements unrelated to the environment. You know, back in 1994, Ukraine received security guarantees that were unfortunately never complied with. And the planet ended up with 2 environmental time bombs in the center of Europe, an occupied Crimea and parts of the Ukrainian Donbass. A peninsula, Crimea, with unique flora and fauna, has been turned into a Russian Navy base. And in parts of the Donbass, we've seen mine flooding, soil erosion, and a dearth of potable water. And this is happening as we speak. This is a shared threat for the whole world. In these times, a disaster, wherever it may strike, I'm confident affects us all. This is best exemplified by the explosion at the Chernobyl nuclear plant, from which not only Ukraine suffered, but dozens of countries all over the globe. This tragedy proves yet another truth. Probably the single most effective action we can think of to help nature recover is for humans to not intervene. Nature in Chernobyl is recovering much faster, a lot faster than expected, as if to suggest that the best course of action that humans can take to help is just stay away. Well, we shouldn't, of course, take it literally and do nothing. We could give up, though. Then we'd have floods and fires every week. We would only swim in the sea wearing a Class A suit and spend the rest of their lives wearing a face mask while only getting rations of drinking water at weekends and food grown on non-toxic land only at Christmas or special occasions, while the average life expectancy globally would drop to 25 or 30 years. Perhaps this would be mankind's fair retribution for us, for those who have forgotten that this is our planet, and for those who have forgotten that that is not our planet. This is the planet of the polar bears, of the tigers, pandas and koalas, of the whales and the sharks. They cannot hold their own summit. They cannot decide to abandon plastics or reduce CO2 emissions. They can't do any of that. It's only up to us to rectify this. It is the causes, in my opinion, that should be addressed. Not the symptoms. We shouldn't change the principles of production or use of mineral resources, but global thinking, global behavior, priorities of world politics and of each individual state. We must measure not only economic growth, but first and foremost environmental progress and development, not GDP growth or inflation rate, but above all the purity of air, water and soil. We need to view any geography not as a potential market for goods and services, but as a habitat, a home for thousands of species of flora and fauna. To be proud not of new makes of machinery, or not as much of the fact that we're creating something, but of the fact that we are preserving something important. A lot has been said. It's time to move from talking the talk to walking the walk. Quickly, without delay, together without exceptions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Abdel El-Sisi, President of Egypt. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to be with you here to deliberate on climate, the issue that affects us all. The most recent IPCC report indicated that enhancing climate action to reach the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal has become a necessity that cannot be delayed. In this context, I'll focus today on the following points. First, Egypt initiated several serious steps to implement a sustainable development model with addressing climate change and adapting to its negative impact at its start, with the goal of government-financed green projects reaching 50% of total projects by 2025 and 100% by 2030. For example, renewable energy constitutes today about 20% of Egypt's energy mix, with the aim of reaching 42% by 2035, in conjunction with rationalizing energy subsidies. In addition, Egypt is currently undergoing a shift to clean transport through expanding its metro network, laying out a new electric railway network, incentivizing the use of electric cars, as well as laying the needed infrastructure. Furthermore, several new sustainable smart cities are currently being developed. Canals are being lined all over the country. To finance these projects, Egypt just recently issued green bonds worth $750 million. And to put all these efforts into their proper institutional framework, Egypt's new National Climate Change Strategy 25 has just been finalized, paving the way to updating our NDCs in a manner that would make the policies, goals, and procedures therein supplementary to our development efforts and our COVID recovery plans, rather than hindering them. Second, as much as Egypt is cognizant of its commitments, it is also aware of the challenges faced by all developing countries. I would like here to emphasize on the fact that developing countries' ability to deliver on their climate change commitments is subject to the support these countries receive, especially with regards to climate finance. The cornerstone for our countries' ability to raise their ambitions and enhance their action in the context of the delicate balance of the Paris Agreement. This balance must be preserved to allow for all mitigation and adaptation efforts to move forward on equal footing. We remain concerned over the gap between available finance and the actual needs of developing countries, added to the challenge faced by our countries to access this finance. To this effect, it is imperative that developed countries fulfill their pledge to provide $100 billion annually to climate finance in developing countries, and we support the call by the UN Secretary General to designate no less than half of that finance to adaptation efforts, and the importance of starting consultations on the new post-2025 financial goal. Third, despite not being responsible for the current climate crisis, Africa faces its most negative economic, social, political, and security impacts. Nevertheless, African countries are an example of serious climate action insofar as its capabilities and the support it receives. To this effect, Egypt calls for a special treatment of the African continent under the Paris Agreement implementation with respect to its special circumstances and the numerous challenges it faces. Ladies and gentlemen, I am confident that the results of this summit will reflect our political commitment to addressing climate change and adapting to its negative impacts. I am also confident that this will resonate with our delegations as they embark on negotiating the issues on the session's agenda, motivating them to reach positive results. I would also like to welcome the Glasgow Breakthrough Agenda and the reports it will produce, and reiterate our support to the British presidency of COP26. We intend to work with the UK in the weeks and months ahead, leading to COP27, which we look forward to host on behalf of the African continent in Egypt. We will work throughout our presidency towards enhancing global climate action and reaching the goals of the Paris Agreement for the benefit of the people of Africa and the entire world. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency.
I therefore urge world leaders to recognize specific climate vulnerability in high mountains and accord to high priority to the mountain agenda in all climate-related negotiations. Keeping the global temperature below 1.5 centigrade is vital for mountain people. It is an issue of our survival to raise awareness on the climate crisis in the Himalaya. My government will host Sagarmatha Sambal dialogue named after Mount Everest. Nepal is an LDC country, is making sincere efforts to balance our development and climate actions. We are engaging with all stakeholders, including the private sectors, indigenous people, disadvantaged community, women, youth, in all our climate actions, recognizing the value of nature to both adapt and mitigate climate change. We have decided to create a dedicated institution for working on nature, conservation, and climate change together. Loss and damage has become a key concern due to increased phenomena of climate-induced disaster. This subject must find a place under Article 4.8 of the Convention. We call upon the private sectors, we call upon the parties to agree on making loss and damage to stand-alone agenda for negotiating and support framework, additional frameworks. The COP26 must ensure adequate adaptation support for the most vulnerable countries by scaling up financial, technical, and capacity building support. We can deliver our goal by through quick, direct, easy access to climate finance. We agree the parties to agree on the clear roadmap for a new collective, quantified, and ambitious goal to climate finance before 2025. Mr. President, the decision we make, COP26 must do justice to those affected now, the future generation and Mother Nature, and the future of our planet together depends on what we decide at this conference. I totally agree with Prime Minister Boris Johnson that this is truly the last chance to save the Earth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Pravind K. Jugnauth, Prime Minister of Mauritius. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the need to limit the rising global temperature below 1.5 degrees Celsius and reach carbon neutrality by 2050 is no longer a desirable objective. It is a critical imperative if we want to avoid a major catastrophe and hopefully put back our planet on a sustainable course. For small island countries like Mauritius, global warming and rising sea levels represent an existential challenge which will cause tremendous damage and lead to massive displacement of people, especially from low-lying islands. Concrete action, accompanied by adequate and predictable funding, is therefore absolutely essential. We all have a responsibility to address this challenge, and Mauritius is prepared to do its share. We therefore commit to take actions that will contribute towards the following. First, reducing gas emission by 40% by 2030. 2, achieving 60% of green energy in our energy mix by 2030. 3, phasing out coal in electricity generation before 2030. 4, promoting a circular economy involving 70% of waste from landfills by 2030. 5th, encouraging the use of electric vehicles. And 6, promoting smart agriculture and island-wide tree planting programs. These actions, along with several others, will pave the way for Mauritius to become a climate-resilient and low-emission country. At the same time, we expect our partners to do their share and ensure that the Glasgow package focuses on 1, enhance action on adaptation, including financing for adaptation. 2, addressing loss and damage caused by climate change. 3, narrowing the emissions gap with new targets for 2030. 4, fulfilling the $100 billion a year finance commitment and ensuring simplified access to these funding by SIDS and other vulnerable countries. And 5, adaptation and mitigation. These actions constitute the basic elements of a comprehensive and global strategy to address this challenge. More particularly, they will represent restorative justice for the most vulnerable countries. As leaders, we have a huge responsibility towards our people and posterity. We have no right to fail them. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Chinh Minh Pham, Prime Minister of Vietnam.
Mr. Vice President, ladies and gentlemen, climate change has truly become the greatest challenge to mankind. Extreme weather phenomena and sea level rise are seriously affecting the food, water security, the sustainable development, even the survival of many countries and communities. This warning from nature compels us to join hands and take strong actions without any delay at the global level. This is a global issue and require a global approach. These affect every citizen and need a whole of citizen approach. First, climate change response, then the restoration of nature must become the highest priority in all development decisions. They must form the highest ethical standard for all levels, sectors, businesses, and citizens. Science and technology must lead the charge, and financing must lend leverage to the transitioning of the development model towards a green and circular economy that is humanitarian and inclusive. All that we do must be nature-based and people-centered. The people must be the driver and subject of the development process to leave no one behind. Second, all countries need to make stronger commitment on greenhouse emission reduction, grounded in the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, respective capacities, and circumstances. I would take this opportunity to call for equality and justice when it comes to climate change. This is an imperative in order to reduce the temperature rise in this planet. For its part, although we are a developing country that started industrialization only over the past 3 decades, Vietnam is a country with advantage in renewable energy. We will develop and implement measures to reduce greenhouse emission using its own domestic resources along with the cooperation and support from the international community, especially developed countries, including through technology transfer and climate finance to achieve zero emission by 2050. Third, climate finance, technology transfer, and capacity building play a critical role in ensuring the success of the Paris Agreement. Developed countries, being major emitters in the past, in exchange for present economic prosperity, need to fully meet the existing financial commitment. At the same time, it is urgent for us to arrive at a more ambitious financial target for the post-2025 period. Ladies and gentlemen, as one of the countries worst affected by climate change, Vietnam is making every effort to both respond to climate change and foster economic development to grow and ensure an ever better life for its people. We look forward to contribute alongside the international community. We hope to advance cooperation with international partners through investment programs and projects and sustainable development. President Ho Chi Minh, the great hero of the Vietnamese people and the great man of culture of the world, once said, "Unity, unity, great unity, success, success, great success." If we are to succeed in the global fight against climate change, global solidarity is the only way. We will discuss together, work together, and win together. Begin from our will, our awareness, our implementation, to making sure that there is resources to do what we do. Our historic decision today will help leave behind a green planet, a sustainable habitat, and lasting happiness for generations to come. Thank you very much.
Your Excellency, it is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Irakli Garibashvili, Prime Minister of Georgia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Dear President, Excellencies, dear colleagues, on behalf of the people of Georgia and our COP26 delegation, it is a great privilege for me to address this historic gathering. I want to first of all express my sincere appreciation to the United Kingdom for its dedication to bring us together and make the COP26 a reality in light of the ongoing challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic. Excellencies, we all know that our living environment is changing. The Caucasus, a beautiful land of mountains, glaciers and rivers, has already lost 40% of its glaciers. During the last 2 decades alone, the speed of glacier loss in the eastern Georgia has exceeded projections from the end of the 20th century. We fully share the alarm presented by UN Secretary General's latest report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that declared a code red for humanity. The report makes crystal clear that the combined commitments of each nation in the nationally determined contributions are insufficient to reduce atmospheric greenhouse gases below dangerous levels, and that greater ambition and effort is needed if we are to meet the long-term temperature goals of the Paris Agreement and avert a global disaster. The challenges are clear, but so are the solutions. We must rise to these challenges and increase our commitment to developing more productive, stable, and resilient societies. The investments in clean energy, climate-smart agriculture, and enhanced adaptive capacity represent concrete steps for reducing emissions and preparing our societies for the unavoidable impacts of climate change. We must embrace the Secretary General's key proposals to protect our planet, reflected in our common agenda. In that spirit, Georgia has committed by 2030 to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by more than half compared to its 1990 levels, and to deepen the understanding of its adaptive capacity to climate change through international partnerships. The government of Georgia has a development plan with a clear vision for 2030 that aligns perfectly with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. For its part, Georgia will achieve this by diversifying its renewable energy sector, expanding the share of wind and solar segments in its energy market, transforming the country's urban mobility, developing low-carbon approaches in the construction, industrial, and waste sectors, advancing climate-smart technologies and services, and increasing the carbon capturing capacity of Georgia's magnificent forests. Of course, we are here because none of us can meet these challenges alone. Leaders from government, industry, academia, subject matter professionals, technical experts, and stakeholders in every community, from every country, and from every region must act jointly to solve the climate crisis by building low-carbon and resilient economies. From small towns and villages to large urban areas, we must all pledge to the younger population today and for future generations that preserving our planet is non-negotiable. We must act. And lastly, let me mention that the COP26 has critical importance for our national and regional interest. Equitable geographical representation, the sovereign equality and dignity of all states are fundamental bedrock principles of the United Nations. Georgia wishes to realize the widest possible cooperation under the Convention, as it is noted in its preamble in response to this uniquely global challenge. My country wishes to thank the Presidency and all parties for their spirit of compassion and their willingness to move forward on agenda-related proposals, including the need to address equitable geographical representation. Georgia looks forward to working with the Presidency and our partners to address these issues in a collaborative, transparent, and equitable manner. No one should be left behind in this fight. We look forward to bold and visionary outcomes from the COP26 that will dramatically advance our collective climate ambition and help us build back from the pandemic, greener, stronger, and more secure than ever. The next generation are counting on us to deliver on our promises. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Mokgweetsi Majoro, Prime Minister of Lesotho. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Your Excellencies, it is appropriate that we meet in person amidst challenges presented by COVID-19 to debate and hopefully take decisions that we, as global leadership, has so far procrastinated on for far too long. The human race coexists with nature in what has to be a symbiotic relationship of accommodation. But we have abused that relationship in pursuit of unbalanced technological and industrial progress. Fossil fuel-driven economic growth and wealth creation has benefited a few countries, but their negative impacts on climate change are being felt widely across the globe. Global temperatures have increased by more than 1 degree Celsius since the pre-industrial period from technologies that have dangerously changed our ecosystem. The impacts are dire. Our communities are now experiencing frequent flooding. 50 or 100-year floods are now occurring in our lifetimes. Planting seasons have shortened as rains have delayed. Droughts are more frequent and blistering. Warm temperature extremes are more frequent. Cold spells occur during summer seasons. Roads, houses, fields, burial places all get washed away. And this is what we live with today. These changes have negatively impacted all facets of life, including on access to food, water, energy, health, and education. But there are no fiscal resources in country or from international funds for adaptation and restitution. National reserves have been depleted by responses to COVID-19, while access to global climate finance mechanisms remain effectively shut. Clearly, we are not in a position to quarrel with scientific inquiry because their predictions have come to bear in our communities. We are disappointed that others feel we still have time, notwithstanding scientific conclusions that we must act now, decisively and ambitiously. For us developing countries, and Lesotho in particular,
Korea is enhancing its 2030 NDC targets to cut greenhouse gas emissions by at least 40% from 2018 levels. This is a bold target that has been raised some 14% from the existing one, a Herculean task indeed that demands steep emission cuts over a short time horizon. Never an easy undertaking, yet the Korean people decided we must act now. Korea cemented its 2050 net zero commitment into law and announced its carbon neutrality scenarios. We are also pledging to lower methane emissions by 30% by 2030. Methane, a much more potent greenhouse gas than CO2, holds the key to tackling the climate crisis. Korea will join the global methane pledge to actively participate in methane reduction efforts. Second, as the only country that has successfully rehabilitated its forests since World War II, Korea will drive cooperation in forest restoration. Trees are carbon sinks that live and breathe. Growing trees and bringing forests back to life offers a vital solution to the climate crisis. It also shows us the way to avert desertification and promote peace in border areas. Korea welcomes the Glasgow Leaders' Declaration on Forest and Land Use and promises to fully cooperate in rejuvenating forests in developing countries. Moreover, through inter-Korean forestry cooperation, we will strive to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions across the entire Korean peninsula. In May next year, Korea will host the World Forestry Congress, and I ask for the global community's support and cooperation for its success. Third, Korea pledges to join the global endeavors to reduce the use of coal. Since the launch of my government, Korea has decommissioned 8 coal-fired power plants earlier than scheduled, with 2 more planned for closure by year-end. By 2050, coal power generation will be phased out completely. We already stopped issuing permits for new domestic coal power plants, and in April, suspended public financing for new overseas coal power generation as well. Korea will fully cooperate with developing countries in their transition to a low-carbon economy, including development of renewable energies. Korea will also reduce carbon footprint of Korean businesses operating abroad. Through the Green Climate Fund and the Global Green Growth Institute, we will continue providing climate finance and utilizing the Climate Technology Center and Network, step up our cooperation with developing countries in green technology. Excellencies, one proposal I'm making is to hold the Youth for Climate on a regular basis. Carbon neutrality is a challenging task that governments and businesses can hardly accomplish on their own. It is a goal that is achievable only when every citizen joins in. If our future generations who are directly affected by the climate crisis work together with older generations to find solutions, we will be able to advance faster towards building a sustainable world. For regular convening of the Youth for Climate, I ask the leaders for their keen interest and support. For Mother Nature, let people hold hands with one another and countries join hands together. We should never regret that we did not act soon enough for our planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Faustin Archangi to Adera, President of the Central African Republic. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam President, Excellencies, Heads of State, Heads of Government, ladies and gentlemen, the Central African Republic, my country, is honored to take part in this global last chance meeting, thanks to which we have become aware of our environment's vulnerability and aware of the need for us to adopt very restrictive measures to combat climate change. My country has gigantic natural resources which are insufficiently exploited. And despite the media campaigns to spread misinformation about the CAR, my country is making progress along the path of peace building and democracy building and contributes significantly to greenhouse gas reduction and the capture of CO2. The Central African Republic is working closely together with the member states of the COMIFAC, the Central African Forestry Commission. This COMIFAC is an ambitious institution designed to manage the basin of the Congo and protect its forests. The basin of the Congo is the second largest forest range of the planet after the Amazon, and we have been firm in the determination of our nationally determined contributions. Ladies and gentlemen, climate change and COVID-19 are today global challenges which can only be met and overcome if we act through multilateralism and through proactive international solidarity. The CAR would like to see COP26 adopting the following in its outcome. Number one, we would like to see reflected the need for developed countries to provide financial resources to support effective and efficient implementation of NDCs by developing countries. Number two, we would like to see the operationalization of the global adaptation objective, including the development of indicators designed to operationalize adaptation goal, such as the improvement of adaptation capacity, the strengthening of climate resilience, and the reduction of vulnerability to provide an adequate and urgent response to climate change in the context of the temperature target. Number 3, the need to finalize pending mandates left over from COP15 in Paris. Sorry, COP21 in Paris, so that we can fully implement the Paris Agreement. Ladies and gentlemen, we will win this wager to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and stabilize the temperature at between 1.5 and 2 degrees Celsius. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Denis Sassou Nguesso, President of the Congo. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Madame la Présidente,
Madam President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government, allow me at the outset to express my sincere thanks to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II and to the government and the people of the United Kingdom for the hospitality and the warm welcome that they have shown my delegation and me personally. Allow me also as President of the Congo Basin Climate Commission, a body that brings together 16 Central and East African states, as well as the Kingdom of Morocco, to convey the importance that we attach to this COP26, which is particularly crucial for the future of humanity. My country, the Republic of Congo, is located at the heart of the Congo Basin, a vast expanse of forest and of peat bogs, which today is the #1 net carbon sink in the world, following the deforestation of the Amazon. The peat bogs of the Central Basin alone store 31 billion tons of carbon, or 3 years of global emissions. The place that the Congo Basin occupies in implementing the goals of the Paris Agreement is therefore absolutely vital. As you will have clearly understood, the Congo Basin provides the world with incalculable ecosystem services. But what does it get in return? Unfortunately, very little. Industrialized countries who have historic responsibility for the disruption of the climate are proving to be reluctant to mobilize the financing needed to make their pledges a reality. The major difficulties faced in the application of Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, which commits rich countries to supporting the mitigation and, above all, the adaptation efforts of developing countries is clear evidence of this. The Republic of Congo, for its part, has already submitted to the Convention Secretariat its nationally determined contribution, which has been revised. Our ambitions, which take into account all sectors that emit greenhouse gases, have been revised up, and the Republic of Congo is a star pupil in the global environment rankings. As I have said at every opportunity since the 1992 Rio Summit, the determination of the countries of the Congo Basin in general, and the Republic of Congo in particular, to preserve this vast area is absolute. However, this commitment goes hand in hand with the equally absolute will to pursue our economic and social development for the well-being of our populations. These two goals are not exclusive, they are complementary. Demanding that we slow down our development so that the planet can breathe easier would be profoundly unjust and even immoral. For that reason, allow me here, once again, to advocate for the Blue Fund, which is a shared initiative of the member countries of the Congo Basin Climate Commission, together with the Kingdom of Morocco. An initiative that now only needs to be financed with the pledges of all our partners. By taking the decision to protect and to conserve the Congo Basin for the good of humanity, we have been able to shoulder our
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. It's my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Narendra Damodar Das Modi, Prime Minister of India.
Is it selected? It's later? Yeah. Friends, today I stand before you as a representative of a land that thousands of years ago had given a mantra to the world. Sam gachadvam, sambhavadvam, samavo manasi janatam. Today, this mantra is all the more important in the 21st century and more relevant. Samgachadvam, this means we must all walk together. Samvadadvam means everyone must get together and talk to each other. And Samvo Mananasi Janatam means that there should also be a meeting of the minds. Friends, when I attended my first climate summit in Paris, it was not with the intention of adding my own promise to the several promises being made by the world, I came to Paris with a concern for all of mankind. I came to Paris as a representative of a culture that has given the message of Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina, which means everyone should be happy. And therefore, the event in Paris was not just a summit for me. It was a sentiment, a commitment. And it was not India that was making those promises to the world. It was promises that 1.25 billion Indians were making to themselves. And I am pleased that a developing country like India that is working on lifting millions of people out of poverty, that is working day and night to ensure ease of living for millions of people, and India that represents 17% of the world's population, but is responsible for only 5% of global emissions. It is that India that has spared no efforts in fulfilling its duty. Today, the entire world acknowledges that India is the only big economy in the world that has delivered both in letter and spirit on its Paris commitments. We are making all possible efforts in a resolute manner. We are working hard, and we will show results. Friends, today I have come to be with all of you, and I have also brought with me India's track record. What I have to say to you is not just words. It is a cheer for the victory, for a bright future for the generations to come. Today, in terms of installed renewable energy capacity, India is ranked 4th in the world. In the last 7 years, India has increased its non-fossil fuel energy by 25%, and this now represents 40% of our energy mix. Friends, more people travel on the Indian railways every year than the entire population of the world. This huge railway system has committed to attain net zero by 2030. This initiative alone will reduce carbon emissions by 60 million tons annually. The same way, our big LED bulbs campaign is reducing emissions by 40 million tons annually. Today, India is working on many such initiatives with a firm will. At the same time, with a view to collaborating with the world, it has also offered international solutions, a revolutionary step to promote solar power. We launched the International Solar Alliance Initiative for Climate Adaptation. We created the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. This is an important and sensitive initiative that will help to save millions of lives. Friends, I would also like to draw your attention to another important subject. Today, the world acknowledges that lifestyles play a very important role in climate change. Today, I would like to suggest to you a one-word movement, This one word in the context of climate can become the key basis for one world. It can become the foundation for it. And this word is life, L-I-F-E. That is lifestyle for environment. Today, it is necessary that all of us come together as a collective partnership and take lifestyle for environment forward as a movement. Lifestyle for environment or life can be given an institutional framework. It can become a mass movement for an environmentally conscious lifestyle. Today, instead of mindless and destructive consumption, we need mindful and deliberate utilization. This movement can help us to achieve goals that can bring about a revolutionary change in diverse areas such as fishing, agriculture, wellness, dietary choices, packaging, housing, hospitality, tourism, clothing, fashion, water management, and energy as well. These are subjects where each of us makes conscious choices every day. These choices made across the world by millions and billions of people can every day take the fight against climate change a billion steps further. And I consider that this can be a movement that from an economic point of view, from a scientific point of view, and based on the experience of past centuries, will help us to overcome all challenges. This is the only way to go from the self to the macro level. This is the only way to go from the welfare of the self to the welfare of all. Friends, during this global brainstorming on climate change, I would like to put before you, on behalf of India, 5 key points to fight this challenge. It is a gift of 5 elixirs. Firstly, India will increase its non-fossil energy capacity to 500 gigawatts by 2030. Secondly, India will fulfill 50% of its energy requirements from renewable energy sources by 2030. Thirdly, between now and 2030, India will reduce its total projected carbon emissions by 1 billion tons. Fourthly, by 2030, India will reduce the carbon intensity of its economy by 45%. And fifthly, by 2070, India will achieve the target of net zero emissions. These 5 elixirs will be an unprecedented contribution by India towards climate action. Friends, all of us are aware of the reality that the promises made so far on climate finance have only proved to be hollow. As we are all increasing our ambitions with respect to climate action, the world's ambitions with respect to climate finance cannot be at the same level as they were during the Paris Agreement. Today, India has resolved to move forward with new commitments and with a new energy. At such a time, climate finance and the transfer of low-cost climate technologies becomes even more important. India expects developed countries to make $1 trillion available as climate finance as soon as possible. Today, as we track the progress on climate mitigation, in the same way, we must also track climate finance. Justice would truly be served if pressure is put on those countries that have not lived up to their climate finance commitments. Today, India is moving forward with a great deal of courage and ambition on the subject of climate. India also understands and shares the pain of other developing countries and has continuously been vocal about their expectations. For many developing countries, climate change is a very big crisis looming before them, one that threatens their very existence. Today, to save the world, we will just have to take big steps This is indeed the need of the hour, and it is this that will also prove the relevance of this forum. I am sure that the decisions taken in Glasgow will safeguard the future of generations to come and will give them a secure and prosperous life. Thank you, Your Excellency. I have taken extra time. I request your forgiveness, but I believe it is my duty to raise a voice for developing countries, and therefore I have focused on it. Once again, I thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Scott Morrison, Prime Minister of Australia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you. There is cause for optimism as we gather here. 18 months ago, the world was staring into the abyss of a 1-in-100-year pandemic. The vaccines we would need had not only not been invented, but there had never been a vaccine for a coronavirus. But here we are, billions vaccinated, and the world is reclaiming what COVID has taken from us. The challenge of combating climate change will be met the same way, and it will be met by those who frankly are largely not in this room. It will be our scientists, our technologists, our engineers, our entrepreneurs, our industrialists and our financiers that will actually chart the path to net zero. And it is up to us as leaders of governments to back them in. Technology will have the answers to a decarbonised economy, particularly over time, and achieve it in a way that does not deny our citizens, especially in developing economies, their livelihoods or the opportunity for a better quality of life. Driving down the cost of technology and enabling it to be adopted at scale is at the core of the Australian way to reach our target of net zero emissions by 2050 that we are committing to at this COP26. Cleaner technology solutions must outcompete existing technologies if they are to be successful everywhere, and especially so in developing economies. This needs to work not just in the developed economies of the North Atlantic, but in the developing economies of the Indo-Pacific as well. Raising the cost of energy just impacts on those who can afford it least. Driving the emergence of low emissions technologies and fostering their widespread adoption is at the heart of our plan to reach net zero. And that's why we've set cost targets for clean hydrogen, low-cost solar, low-carbon steel and aluminium, energy storage, carbon capture and storage, and soil carbon. And we're not starting from scratch. 90% of commercial solar cells globally use Australian technology. Australia has the best rates of rooftop solar in the world. Our installation of renewables is 8 times faster than the global rate and 3 times faster than some of the most advanced economies in Europe. We have already reduced emissions in Australia by more than 20% since 2005, 54% as an emissions intensity measure, and over the same time our economy has grown by 45%, proving that economic growth and jobs is not at odds with emissions reduction. And by 2030, our national determined contribution here at COP26 notes that our emissions in Australia will fall by 35% by 2030, far exceeding our Paris commitment. Australia meets and beats our commitments, and we are doubling our initial climate finance commitment for our Pacific family and Southeast Asian partners to $2 billion committed here at COP26. Looking forward, we are forging technology partnerships domestically and abroad with Singapore, Germany, the United Kingdom, Japan, Korea and Indonesia, and we are close to concluding one with India. Australia is investing over $20 billion over the next decade to drive the transition, leveraging private sector investment to reach $80 billion in total. We are also working to establish high-integrity offsets internationally, working with our close friends and neighbours in the Pacific, in the Indo-Pacific. The scene is set, global momentum to tackle climate change is building. Countries with net zero commitments cover over 80% of the world GDP. In Australia's case, 90% of our exports are to countries with net zero commitments. Our researchers, scientists, entrepreneurs, investors, and most importantly, our people are ready. The Australian way is to bet on them, and we think that's a good bet. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Alexander Schallenberg, Federal Chancellor of Austria. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to address this distinguished group here today. My thanks goes to Prime Minister Boris Johnson for convening us all here at this critical point in time for this critical purpose. Our world is still in a stage of emergency, and if the past 18 months of COVID pandemic has reminded us of one thing, then that it is in order to manage a global crisis effectively, we have to act fast and we have to act together. The same goes for a fight against climate change, and I can assure you that Austria is determined to play its part together with our partners in Europe and worldwide. Domestically in Austria, we're aiming at reaching net zero by 2040. With this ambitious goal in mind, we strongly focus on the use of renewables. Currently, we cover over 70% of our national electricity needs from renewable energy sources. Our goal is to bring this up to 100% by 2030. And we intend to achieve this milestone without using nuclear energy, because we don't believe that this is a sustainable or safe energy source. Another domestic priority for us is carbon pricing. We have just agreed a large-scale ecological turnaround as part of an eco-social tax reform. With this tax reform, we lay the foundation for a certificate-based carbon pricing scheme in Austria. And finally, we are investing more in public transportation and energy efficiency than ever before in our history. These domestic activities go obviously hand in hand with our cooperation at EU and at international level. We wholeheartedly support the European Union's ambitious climate goals. With them, Europe is truly setting an example, and it is on track to becoming the first climate-neutral continent by 2050. We also fully support the EU's role as one of the world's leading contributor of climate finance. As Austria, we have recently increased our contribution to the Green Climate Fund by 100 million euros, bringing it to a total of 130 million. However, ladies and gentlemen, we have to be aware of one fact. Despite all our efforts across all government levels, be it national, regional or local, we will fall short of our targets if we do not ensure the closest possible cooperation with the private sector. Because radical reductions in carbon emissions can only succeed through cooperation and innovation. Of course, every one of us, as individuals, as families, as societies, has a role to play to reduce his own carbon footprint. But unless we change everything we do, we have to rely on new ways of doing. Only new, sustainable forms of industrial production, of transport technology, of consumption, of housing, of forest management, to just name a few of them, will enable us to become fully climate neutral. These necessary innovations, I'm convinced, can only come from the closest possible cooperation with the private sector, from scientists, entrepreneurs, or others alike. And it is our task as political leaders to enable this cooperation, to support it wherever we can. This is critical in my opinion, because if we fail to do so, we would risk a situation in which we had to choose one day between the economic health of our nations or the environmental health of our planet. And I'm sure that you will all agree with me that neither of them is an option. Ladies and gentlemen, the protection of our climate and our planet is one of our generation's most important challenges, a challenge that we need to live up to with determination, innovation, and global cooperation. We, as Austria, stand ready to work alongside all of you in the years to come to live up to this task which history has placed upon us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Mark Rutte, Prime Minister of the Netherlands. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen, this summer in the south of my country, in the Netherlands, I stood on the bank of the Maas River, which was threatened by flooding caused by extreme rainfall. It was a terrifying sight. There, the dikes held. But elsewhere, in the province and across the border in Belgium and in Germany, raging torrents caused devastation. This is only one sad example that illustrates today's reality. More and more people worldwide are being impacted by climate change. It's serious, and it calls for serious action. First, we need further binding global commitments and concrete measures to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees. For example, reducing harmful emissions to net zero, delivering a sustainable energy transition that offers new opportunities, and investing in a circular economy. COP26 can and must make real progress on these points. But we have to face reality. Climate change is already having lasting effects. So climate resilience must be our motto, climate adaptation our common endeavor. The King of the Netherlands has been battling the elements for centuries, from North Sea floods to Caribbean storms. Adaptation is in our DNA. That's why we hosted the Climate Adaptation Summit earlier this year. And we will co-host with Tajikistan the UN 2023 Water Decade Conference. Studies show that investing in adaptation and resilience works, because climate-proofing cities, farming and infrastructure protects livelihoods and ensures economic continuity. And innovative nature-based solutions and sustainable business models create new jobs and create new economic opportunities. For the most vulnerable communities, adaptation funds are often in short supply. And that is why we need to support each other. More than half of our kingdom's public climate financing goes to adaptation. And it's made up almost entirely of grant funding. And we hope that more countries will follow suit. Because climate mitigation and adaptation are two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. And with that principle as our guide, we have to take action. Timely, firm, and concerted action. As I said during yesterday's G20 in Rome, it should now be about action, action, action. Implementation, implementation, implementation. Ladies and gentlemen, you can count on the Kingdom of the Netherlands. And we are counting on you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. It's my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Askar Mamin, Prime Minister of Kazakhstan. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. Chairman, Excellencies, only 6 years ago, the Paris Agreement marked a turning point in the international climate policy discourse. It's my great pleasure to note that Kazakhstan was one of the first countries to ratify the document. In the updated national determined contribution, we have reaffirmed our commitment to unconditionally reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 15% by 2030. To fulfill its international obligations, Kazakhstan has adopted major upgrades to its national legislation. The new environmental code will drive comprehensive adaptation of green technology in practically every sector of the national economy and expand its capacity to face future climate-related challenges. Our commitments in respect of the NDCs include five-fold expansion in the volume of energy produced from renewables from 3 to 15%, doubling the amount of energy produced from environmentally friendly sources from 20 to 40, expanding the national carbon absorption capacity by planting more than 2 billion trees, and 30 percentage point reduction in the share of energy generated from coal, from 70 to 40. I am also delighted to inform you that, as announced at the 2020 Climate Ambition Summit, Kazakhstan is in the process of finalizing long-term strategy to achieve carbon neutrality by the year 2060. The strategy targets unprecedented reductions in emissions through the series of focused interventions aimed at promoting the sustainable use of land and water, energy efficiency, electrification, and the large-scale use of eco-friendly and renewable energy sources, among others. Given the capital intensity of an effort of such a magnitude, our approach to decarbonization will focus on maximizing the use of market mechanisms and private investment. Of course, our effort on advancing the global climate change agenda will not be limited by our geographical borders and the commitments we made in Paris. Given Kazakhstan's ambition to serve as a Central Asia driving force of the sustainable environment agenda, we stand ready to serve as a hub to unite regional efforts towards achieving green growth. Kazakhstan's Climate Hub for Sustainable Development will act to facilitate technology transfer, attract green finance, and share knowledge. In addition, given Kazakhstan's capacity to produce and process rare earth elements, we stand ready to contribute to advancing global supply chains, which play a critical role in accelerating the world's transition to clean energy. Ladies and gentlemen, as we are all emerging from the pandemic, I believe this conference is crucial to set in place an urgent, effective, and human-based transition to a global green economy. Such transition must ensure to both preserve the planet and protect the people that inhabit it. It must also make sure that financial burdens are shouldered fairly among people and among countries. Despite the many obstacles we are all facing in this challenging path, let me conclude by reaffirming that Kazakhstan remains strongly committed to the implementation of the global climate change agenda. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Aziz Akhanouch, Prime Minister of Morocco. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Merci.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam President. President, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government. Here we are in Glasgow following other similar conferences, also tasked and replete with a great deal of hope. And yet the latest report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change notes that climate change, as it is observed today, and despite the commitments made in Paris, is of unprecedented scale. The worsening of this climate change is particularly worrying for a country such as my own, Niger, at the heart of the Sahara, at the heart of the Sahel, and jeopardized by ceaseless desertification, which is continuing to bury agricultural and pastoral lands under the sand. Populations engaged in animal husbandry are thus forced to move ever further south and to dispute with agricultural communities for natural resources, which also for a great time now have also been subject to an inexorable depletion as a result of climate change. Climate change in the form of repeated droughts and, paradoxically, in recent years, also by equally destructive flooding. Ladies and gentlemen, the phenomenon of terrorism currently visible in the Sahel, far from generating out of spontaneity or by accident, is linked in large part to climate change, which, by impoverishing biodiversity, has jeopardized the way of life of herders. I would thus like to make a solemn appeal for the international community to mobilize in the form of a special fund alongside the countries of the Sahel that are jeopardized by the advance of the sands, just as they have mobilized alongside the small island nations that are being invaded by the ocean waters. This fund should serve projects of reforestation to reforest areas that have been invaded by the desert. Poor countries such as ours, which have no responsibility for climate change, are today those that pay the highest price for the consumerism that was promoted by a development model which took very little notice of peoples and future generations. Ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, I would like to reiterate our support for the common African position on climate change and make an appeal to emitting countries to keep to their commitments to developing countries by clearly defining mechanisms for the implementation of the Paris Agreement, which is still awaiting implementation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Before we proceed, I would ask Excellencies to speed up their speeches since the transportation is set and it's ready for pick you up outside. Thank you. Now it is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Hakainde Hichilema, President of Zambia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency Boris Johnson, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and Chairperson of the Summit. Your Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, Your Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, Your Excellency MS Patricia Espinosa, Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I wish to begin by thanking you and congratulating Your Excellency Prime Minister Boris Johnson for convening this important summit at the commencement of the 26th session of the Conference of Parties, COP26, to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. I am confident that together with the global community of nations, we will deliver the outcome that the world urgently needs for averting a climate crisis. Chairperson, science is clear that we only have a small window of opportunity to ensure that we collectively take decisive action and prevent the negative impact of climate change. For developing and vulnerable countries like Zambia, which is among the least developed countries with multiple challenges, climate change brings an additional layer of challenges, an additional burden, and aggravates existing ones. Very important. Climate change makes it difficult for us to effectively address a number of social-economic challenges in order to lift our people from high poverty levels so as to improve their livelihoods. Chairperson, for the sake of humanity, a positive outcome from this conference is not an option, but an absolute necessity. We are confident that the global community will share our sense of urgency in this matter. If there is any lesson, like has been indicated by other speakers before me, we should learn from the COVID-19 pandemic, it is the need for our collaboration on this shared planet in order to secure our mutual safety and success. We are hopeful and confident that if the desired outcome from this summit, and indeed COP26 is achieved, we should move to agree the following. Number one, clear, deep, and real cuts in greenhouse gas emissions to be addressed by all countries, with the developed countries taking the lead. Number two, adequate, predictable financing to enable the developing countries to make impactful contributions to address this critical global challenge. Number three, support with technologies and the capacities that the world needs to shift from carbon-intensive development paths to low-carbon green economies. Absolutely essential. Number four, placing a premium on adaptation measures and the support required to ensure that we safeguard the lives and livelihoods of the most vulnerable people on the planet and to protect natural ecosystems. Number five, resolving the remaining technical bottlenecks that are delaying us from unleashing the full potential of the Paris Agreement. Chairperson, Zambia is willing and ready to support your leadership and will work closely with the global community in resolving this challenge. In this regard, I'm happy to report that prior to this summit in July 2021, Zambia submitted a revised and updated nationally determined contribution to the Paris Agreement, spelling out the following ambitious efforts. Number one, we have pledged to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by 25% based on the 2010 levels by 2030, using a combination of our own domestic resources and other support that we have traditionally received before. Number two, we are willing and ready to go further to reduce our emissions by 47% if we are adequately supported by you, our global partners. Number three, we have increased the sectors under mitigation from the initial 3 to 6 in the revised NDC as we steadily move towards the economy-wide mitigation approach. Number four, given that adaptation is a critical component of our NDC, we have also developed indicators to enable us to track progress on how we are building resilience in the natural and human systems. Number five, we will expedite the implementation of activities through our development of bankable project proposals to enable us to access the necessary financing. And of course, number six, last but not the least, in just 2 months of our being elected in office by the Zambian people, we have created a ministry, a dedicated ministry of green economy and environment, which will spearhead the work of addressing climate change and other related challenges in a robust manner. Chairperson, as I conclude, I wish to emphasize the need for us all to foster a sense of urgency as we work to give our political momentum to our negotiators and encourage them to make good use of the next 2 weeks to give the world an outcome it needs from this conference. We have an obligation and noble task to deliver for our citizens the much needed and desired changes to preserve this planet and safeguard our environment for future generations. Chairperson, this is our duty. This is our individual, collective, and indeed inescapable responsibility to our world, to our planet. I thank you all for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure.
أشكرك صاحب السعادة ويسعدني أن أرحب بصاحب السعادة السيد جورج ويا رئيس ليبيريا. صاحب السعادة الكلمة لكم.
Excellency, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this year COP26 is taking place at a time when the world is having to learn to live with the devastating and disruptive consequences of the deadly coronavirus pandemic. Climate change, like COVID-19, present an even bigger threat to the world and to our common humanity.